do you have a political identity, political affiliation that you abide by?
Yeah, I mean, I've started to go down the track that like I really am opposed to sort of this political identity idea because particularly the way it's sort of framed up these days, and I'm really starting to believe the whole thing is kind of a conjured up idea, and and I so I try not to be. I consider I mean I officially register as independent, and I try to look sort of issue by issue and not try to figure out what the tribe is doing, but it's hard. I mean, you can find yourself, you have a friend circle, you kind of know how they lean. Now I have a sort of a diverse friend circle when it comes to the political leanings, but still kind of leans one way or the other. It leans more blue. I'm in California. That's just kind of goes without saying a little bit, at least the part of California that I'm in. But I do live in an area that's pretty purple, so we've got a mix of red and blue around. And I have my friend network has some red, some blue, probably more blue, like I said. But so I struggle with this because a lot of my a lot of my friends get mad at me because they're gonna be surprised by some of the issues, and and I've taken those political spectrum tests, little quizzes and things before, and I was surprised recently. I usually it had come up some kind of a middle bluish, right, like blue, blue middle, but lean blue. This most recent time I came back as something they call the ambivalent right, which I was kind of surprised about. It's still, a centerish kind of one of the centerish options on their scale of 10 different things, I think. But I was kind of surprised by that. So I was painted red by that quiz. So yeah, I think my issues kind of jump around, and it's very hard because you sometimes find yourself saying, well, what does my side say about this thing before you decide what you think about it, right? So yeah, I try not to fall into that trap.
That's fair enough. Fair enough. I'm definitely uh kind of similar in a sense that I don't really care about political identity or ideology. I say I'm in the middle just because I just whatever makes the most sense to me is what I'm advocating for on that particular day. So I definitely feel that, of course. With that said, do you think the current state of political discourse it's the worst it's ever been since the Civil War?
Well, I mean, I don't know all the history, but I certainly have talked to a lot of folks about this topic, and there's definitely a lot of feelings that there has been times when things have been harsh, but the level of what they call the sort of affective polarization, where you really dislike the other side, you distrust the other side, you sort of think they're evil, is pretty much at an all time high, or at least like you say, sort of post Civil War high. So it's possible there's been other times when things have been bad, but it's definitely up there. The temperature is high.
I definitely agree. It's a lot of differing these far sides. With the final thing, I want to function if they get more important and more influential in terms of dealing or bridging the gap between the toxic and the toxic discourse between the two sides.
Yeah, yeah, I think they can, but how do so the challenge is how does a third party sort of begin to get equal footing or at least a more fair playing field? Because right now the two major parties sort of control everything, and for all that they disagree about, the one thing they agree about is they don't want a third party, right? Um, so they agree about that. Oddly, isn't that funny? But so how do you get there? And I think that's what So I think a third party without changing anything else doesn't do very much except sort of it's a protest vote, and maybe that matters. But I think if we can actually maybe rank choice voting, jumble primaries, some other things, then we can start to open up some of this, take away some of these um, institutional benefits that the major parties have, and make that a little fairer for a potential third party. I definitely think the country wants something other than the two the way the two parties are operating today, and pressure from a third party, even if maybe they don't win, maybe that pressure could. I mean, because this is the challenge that you have. I talked to a lot of political scientists about this, right? As soon as the third party starts to gain some traction, the other parties just kind of latch onto their ideas, and that kind of squishes them out. And that may be okay. Maybe that's the effect that we'd want. It's not really fair to the third parties, but maybe that would improve things sort of indirectly by the current parties kind of overwhelming or subsuming those ideas from the third party. But I definitely think the country needs or wants something that other than what the two parties are giving us. So I'm ready to try just about anything.
Yeah, I definitely feel what you're saying in terms of providing that other opinion that, for the most part, at the very least, when I'm thinking of a valuable third party, for the most part, I'm thinking of a more moderate third party at the end of the day that can bridge some of the ideals from both sides to kind of come up with a, some type of compromise solution at the end of the day based off whatever conversation or topic that is going on that particular day. And that nuance can definitely appeal to a lot of voters. And that, I do like what you said in terms of the voting, because that's something I bring up constantly on the podcast as well recently, is the potential value of implementing these different voting systems, such as ranked choice voting, approval voting, star voting, for example, that can be a more representative sample of the voters' opinions, as well as brings more value to third parties in elections as well. So I'll constantly reinforce that. Definitely be an advocate for something a little bit different from what we have now. That's a lot more lesser of two evils type of voting style we got currently going on, of course. Um, with that said, I do want to give you the opportunity to kind of talk about your podcast right now. So what is your podcast about? Why did you start it? And what is the message you're trying to get across when it comes to your podcast?
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to do that. Yeah, they what got me to start this was we sort of had this buildup of this kind of rancor and hostility going on, and I kind of saw that in my like I was the guy out there posting on social media, I getting in political arguments, whatnot. Plus, just my circles, people I knew, they were but between sort of the 2016 election and then the COVID lockdowns and everything related to the pandemic, you just saw families canceling each other or blocking each other, losing, disconnecting, and getting in fights. And you saw, longtime friends not talking anymore. And so this kind of thing, I had friends getting off social media saying it was too much. And all that was kind of a catalyst to sort of say there's something going on here. So I started looking at it and I saw a big aspect of it is this kind of, it's got different names, but sort of the outrage machine, the outrage industry, chaos machine. You see different names applied to it, where there's a lot of incentive structures between politicians, between on social media, in the news media, of sort of getting us angry all the time and sending this message that the other side's evil. And and we sort of have been telling ourselves the other side's evil for so long now, we sort of believe it, and then we can't really have dialogue. If you can't have dialogue with somebody who's evil, right? So we sort of lose all ability to have any dialogue, and we sort of basically we just lose our ability to be rational because we get so wedded to these ideas. And so that's a lot of where this started. So in some sense, I have the podcast nobody knows they need, because it's a podcast about sort of talking about that, how to be less stressed out, in social media, how to be less stressed out about the news, and and what's going on with our brains. I talk to scientists and researchers and authors and others about kind of what's going on there and how can we kind of lower the temperature, and that's what I'm really about.
I'm definitely with you to a lot of the things that you're saying, of course. When it comes down to it, the current state of conversation and these interactions between the two side is definitely not a healthy way to kind of have these types of discourse at the end of the day. We all recognize from both sides that we do want a better society. Obviously, the biggest differentiator right there is how we do it. And either people on the left that kind of believes in a little bit more of an individualized freedom and liberty versus some people on the right who has a kind of institutionalized principles that they abide by, whether that's religion or something different, of course. Regardless, they think that the way that they approach things is the best course of action to live a better life, to live a more, fruitful life overall for people and for the country as a whole. And they are so stuck into thinking that their way is the best that, like you said already, they think that they are good, the other side is evil. Anything that is not my side or my opinion or my side's opinion is the evil opinion. And they're getting pushed and further into these pockets. And I do contribute, part of it. You could probably argue, a few things, whether you want to say like how politics is getting represented in the media, whether you want to say, Donald Trump's impact and changing the Republican Party. But I do think a good chunk of it can also be attributed to the ability to kind of put yourselves in these echo chambers due to social media, of course. And social media obviously getting more and more popularized for the younger generations. That means if this doesn't click for people, the next slew generation of voters are going to be even more set in their ways in their echo chamber. So we got to find out, obviously, a more productive way to ensure that people are getting the proper perspective and proper experience to kind of have a larger kind of idea of how the world works versus their little echo chamber that they may be in, or their little bubble that they may be in. I think that's very important. I preach the value of perspective and experience and conversation consistently. So with that said, let's dive into the bigger conversation we want to have. Of course, I've talked about the political divide plenty. You heard me talk about it a little bit right now, but in your opinion, what do you think a political divide means for society? What do you think that actually means in terms of what is going on right now between the left and the right?
Yeah, I mean, to your question in the beginning about is it worse than it's been and that kind of thing. I mean, some of this more recent, you probably follow a lot of this too, but a lot of these recent studies. In fact, I sat on a Brookings Institute research study yesterday, talking about the percent of Americans who I forget the exact question, but it was along the lines of the Americans going in the wrong direction, and it's probably time for patriots are going to have to step up and with violence, right? Something like that. And it was um, it was 25% or 23% of Americans overall. So almost 1 in 4 Americans overall. It was 1 in 3 Democrats, and it was 1 in 5, about 1 in 5 Democrats. So people think maybe this is only Republicans that think this, and it was like 1 in 4. I think it was about 1 in 4 independents. So 1 in 3 people think violence is the way, that the next step, whether and 1 in 5 if you're a Democrat. So so that's I think that speaks to a lot of it right there. And how do you get there? Well, you get there because you've moralized the thing. Right now, you've really well, there's a lot of reasons, but I mean, a big piece of it comes back ultimately to that you've moralized this and think that the other side is evil enough that violence is justified, right? And so you can dehumanize them to the point where you're ready to do violence. And I think so that is where we are with society. So that's the challenge with society on at the political elite level. you know we're encouraging them to behave this way. I mean, I think the speaker vote was actually in this whole speakership process was kind of a manifestation of that we're sort of encouraging the most extreme folks, to sort of to take these extreme positions, to brag and complain about the other side. And I'm not saying just the Republicans do it. This was, in this case, it was Republicans demonstrating it. The Democrats do this too, where we just want to tell, they want to make sure they're pointing out how, I mean, if you get, I don't know if you get, if you get campaign emails or you see these kind of campaign messaging, but it's never about what the candidate's going to do. It's always about protecting us from the other guy, how terrible the other guy is and what they're going to do. So it's never about what I'm going to do. It's always about what how bad this other person is, and we must stop them somehow. And so, that's there's so much we're contributing that. So that's part of my messaging is that we're part of the problem because we want that stuff, right? We made a moral choice. We made a choice. We picked a tribe. And now every time someone tells us how the other tribe is bad, we like that. We want to see that because that reinforces our choice and tells us we made the right choice. See, those other guys are bad. We don't want to see a nuanced conversation between our side and the other side having a nuanced conversation and either agree and disagree or maybe even coming to a compromise. Oh no, we want to put a stake in the ground and have our guys fight to tooth and nail for everything and not give an inch. And so we're encouraging it, like, and to this point where we're ready, we dehumanize the other side so much we're ready to do violence.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to me in terms of how people kind of perceive America at the end of the day, right? So, yes, there are things that are not ideal, obviously, because a perfect society is at the end of the day impossible. I do think progressing towards a utopia is a good thing. Having an actual utopia is a bad thing. There is a difference, obviously. Um, but that's when it definitely comes into mind, and like you said, they're moralizing it, and they don't realize that the situation in America compared to most of the world is night and day for the most part, in my opinion, in terms of the freedoms that people you can have in America, in terms of the things that you can advocate for in America versus other locales, other countries, of course. And that perspective can really change a lot of people's minds. But when they're set up thinking that America is bad from the start without really understanding how the world is, and the other sides are already bad before really understanding how why their position is the way they are, you're already set off to a bad precedent. And when you're young, even like if you're not getting campaign emails, but I'm sure you could see, videos on YouTube, for example, or your parents can reinforce these things that they're learning from to their kids, or you go to a university or college or even a workplace and you get certain conversations bubbling around and you just want to fit into the group setting. And yes, it's kind of part of mob mentality, but that's what happens at the end of the day, is that you kind of go like, hey, that makes good points, I'm going to agree with that at the end of the day. And what's the most important part in these conversations is, like you said, it's never a black and white thing. It's always nuance. And that's why it never will get better, because a solution can be proposed from the right and left. But a lot of these times, people don't realize that these solutions, or probably majority of the time, like, it benefits society as a whole, but there's always going to be a problem. There's always going to be something that happens that either they don't account for or they have to adapt to. And that problem is going to be the negative. And the other side just goes like, oh, you see, this happened. That was a bad solution. That's what always happens, because there's never a foolproof 100% plan that is going to fix everything. Perfect example when it comes down to, if you want to bring up like the Me Too stuff with, women coming out, obviously with some of the kind of worst type of people taking advantage of women in these different spaces. And the reason for Me Too, and even feminism, to be honest, was for women empowerment. Overall, women empowerment is good, but you're gonna have some people point out to the negatives, because there was negatives with like certain people kind of going overboard with certain allegations and not getting, punished or getting any flack for the allegations that they're pointing out. This is part of the conversation of certain women that is, alleging certain cases. I think there's a recent situation with, it was a baseball player. I don't remember his name, but there was a girl who came to his place, and the girl framed him for beating her, and she took a whole video the morning of the next day alleging that he beat her, and she was just kind of, smiling and acting all cool, and then she had a bunch of text messages with her friend saying, I'm going to steal all this guy's money. So yes, women empowerment is good, but of course you're going to have a negative such as this, but that doesn't mean the entire movement is bad. And when I hear conversations of people saying, "Oh, you see, we had a feminism, Me Too, society's down the drain," I'm like, "Bro, what are you talking about?" Like, that's such a dumb opinion to have. But that plays into what you're saying. They moralized it so much to the point where their side is always good, and any bad thing that is from the other side is something I can latch onto to prove that that side is bad, and it's not productive by any means. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. And I want, yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to the way you started that conversation, sort of talking about we often lose sight of how good we do have it here. I mean, you see people throwing around terms like fascism and dictatorships and stuff like that. Go to a country with an actual dictator and see what a real dictatorship looks like. You talk about people where we don't have free speech, or our free speech is infringed because Elon Musk blocked somebody on Twitter or whoever. And go to a country that actually doesn't have free speech and actually doesn't have free press, whether it's a state-run media or that's all they have, or journalists are put in jail and things like that. Like we just have it so easy, and that even gets all the way back to like complaining about the small things that go wrong with the Me Too movement. It's the same kind of thing. It's like Freud talks about the narcissism of small things. I think something like that, where it's like when you don't have anything big to fight about, you fight about the little stuff.
I definitely agree. And yes, it can be a certain type of blessing in the sense that, we have it so easy relatively easy compared to the rest of the world in American society. Like in reality, how many people are just like, I mean, all I gotta do is just go to school, play video games all day, go on social media, watch TikToks, eat. It's like, yes, some people, have it worse, but like still even those people have it better than the majority of the world. And we take these things for granted, of course, and things that it could be better, and this is why this and this is terrible. So I do think that that perspective and understanding on what you really have needs to kind of be in the people's brains a little bit more. But with that said, when we see this divide, how do you think we should bridge it? How do you think we should kind of mend the kind of discourse between the two?
Yeah, there are a lot of people really working hard on this problem. That's certainly one thing I've learned going out there and finding folks to talk to on the show and researching stuff that's out there. So there are a lot of people really putting time in this. And so I'm I think there will be some more developments that are going to sort of find ways to sort of scale some of these ideas, because there have been some sort of promising ideas. On the other hand, you do have a lot of the scientists that are sort of like, well, it's going to be tough. It's sort of like the only way, the way out is through kind of thing. Like we're just going to have to work our way through this and circle it around. But one of the most promising ideas is to lower that perception gap. So lower, we have a lot of perception gap issues. We have a lot of misperceptions. Like we think the other side hates us more than they really do. We think the other side is more extreme than they really are. We think they're more prepared for violence than they really are, and then that makes us more prepared for violence, this kind of thing, right? So I think that's a big one, is if we can lower those misperceptions, and that will help to sort of dehumanize the other side and open up the dialogue just a little bit. You'll be a little bit more likely to have a conversation. You still may not compromise. You don't have to compromise every time, but at least you can have a little bit more productive dialogue. You can lower that temperature, and I think that's one of the big ones. If we can, and there's some ways of that. I just there's a lot of people working on that, like ways to do that, like prompts on social media that perhaps could prompt you that, hey, the things aren't as bad as you think they are. Here there's even things like online video games that you can play, and you don't even know you're sort of playing a political game, because it's only a political message is only kind of squeezed in every once in a while. And but it kind of lowers some of those perceptions. Like it's asked questions like, hey, what percentage of Democrats do you think want to do X, or something like that, and then you answer, and then it kind of comes back and says, oh, the percentage is really this, and just kind of moves on to the next question. It's like it's not, and you don't even know you're being sort of given some of these facts, some of these misperception facts. So that's a big one. And some of it, I just preach this on my show like crazy. Just it starts with us, right? I mean, we have to start to be, decide we've reached our limit. I call it outrage overload. We've reached our outrage overload, and we're ready to start taking an active part in lowering the temperature, one person at a time. And then, some scientists are encouraged by that idea of a cascading effect. If you've ever been to a party and it's kind of getting late and people are hanging around, but then you see somebody else leave, then somebody else left too. Now suddenly, sort of everyone leaves like really fast, right? So I think that's kind of how a cascading effect works. So maybe if we start doing things from the bottom up, we can maybe achieve some of those cascading effects.
I do think that's a good idea. There's definitely kind of layers you have to play into it, but obviously starting from the bottom is the best way to approach that. Appealing to the youth, trying to opening their perspective right from the beginning. Obviously, the hard thing will be, you know, over kind of affecting them beyond whatever culture or environment is kind of pushing them in a certain direction. Um, I I will say this, that I am like hopeful in terms of individuals from my generations after me, the understanding the way we communicate now is not productive. And I have said in terms of the kind of understanding of social media that my generation has is obviously going to be way better than the generation before us, and honestly way better than the generation after us, because we knew social media before social media existed, we knew it during, and we understand the impact of social media. And by that we can kind of preach these kind of understandings to other generations after us, because obviously the generation after us is going to grow up with social media, so they're not going to have the experience without social media. So I do think having these individuals that are growing up looking at the state of discourse, that there are probably a lot of people that is looking at how we communicate and is probably getting off put based off the toxic way that a lot of these crazy far lefties and crazy far righties are acting consistently and representing their sides. So I do think that is obviously going to be there, and having these tools that you mentioned already in spaces that they're obviously going to be in, whether that's video games, whether that's social media, arguably education. I don't think education really, especially public education, didn't really teach me about like government and politics. Now it's gonna be hard to kind of go because certain parents are gonna like, I don't want to teach you about politics. But I think there's something to be said in terms of critical thinking and how critical thinking can play into understanding the nuances of political discourse. But that's a, I guess, different conversation. But at the very least, these spaces starting from the ground can definitely be very fruitful for these individuals who they grow up and have that kind of proper perception of things be a little bit stronger. But I guess that also goes into another question when it comes down to these on information you're getting online and information you're getting from the other side, and how the misinformation has really affected individuals as they consume um, basically opinions disguised as facts about the other side. How do we deal with information on the online and on the internet?
Yeah, it's a big concern, and especially you were talking about sort of the up and coming generations, and there's a lot of information about a lot of studies on this that they're like you sound like you pay attention to these. You rattled off three or four current topics to talk about at the beginning of the show, but a lot of people just aren't, like, they're not paying attention to news very much. They're very minimally consuming news. They're almost getting all their information coming from TikTok videos and dance videos and so on. And so, I'm hoping you're right about that. Those generations will also say, well, hey, if this is how everybody's getting the information, we're going to have to inform them through these vehicles. But what I worry about is bad actors, kind of beating them to that punch and getting ahead of the game and informing, using those, because it's already happening. I mean, they use those videos, or they use those techniques to do a lot of misinformation too. Bad actors do so, and also bad actors plus innocent people that believe the stuff. Like, people get sucked up into these things and then believe it, and they just don't really check it. You talked about critical thinking. They don't really check those sources and don't really look into it. They like what it says, so why should I look into it? I like what it says. I'm going to go tell everybody else about it. So we get a lot of misinformation spread that way. So I mean, you've got the source and the supply and the demand, and and we're the demand side, and so being better information consumers, being more critical. But it's not it's not what most people do. Like, most people don't really go look for reliable news sources. They don't really appreciate the difference between journalism and just a guy saying some stuff on YouTube. And um and so it can be a little challenging, and there's a lot. And like you say, I mean, I don't know how much education about misinformation helps, because people don't trust the institutions anyway. So that, like, I don't, I'm going to do it my way. And sometimes we didn't really get a very good footing for how to do our way. I mean, research is hard. I mean, it's kind of hard work checking sources and that kind of thing. So you almost need to have some trust, because you just can't fact check everything all the way down to the original sources. So you have to trust that, well, most of the time the New York Times or somebody is telling me pretty close to right. And if they get it wrong, maybe the Wall Street Journal will check them or something like that. But like I said, I'm concerned because a lot of people just never go to those kind of sources anyway. They're just only on social media and some of these other ways. So yeah, it's a tricky situation. But I mean, so I look at it a lot from the demand side. Like, can we be better consumers? Like, try not to demand this bad information, but it's kind of human nature to do it.
I definitely go back and forth in terms of how this new wave of social media and individualized content creation is affecting society. I do think there is some merit to, the kind of freedom of individuals to kind of speak their mind and share their values to people while not being attached to an established institution, of course. So that obviously can play into the benefit to an extent in terms of, podcasts like mine, podcasts like yours, other types of content creators whose purpose or who what they're trying to do is trying to open up the perspective and conversation and people obviously are going to be more willing nowadays because of a lot of the anti-establishment rhetoric that is going on that you mentioned before, which is partially due to Donald Trump in terms of the right and has already been a thing in terms of the left. So it's really not boding well in terms of, you know, trusting the institutions as a whole. But if we're going down the route to have people want to trust individuals a lot more, then I guess there's a certain benefit to the new way of consuming information when it comes to these individualized content creators. And we're seeing these individuals gain more and more influence, gain more and more impact, and all that stuff. Of course, the counter to that is there's no way to kind of vet them out. There's no way to ensure that these are the right people telling them these information, because you have people like Nick Fuentes. If you don't know who Nick Fuentes is, he spouts a lot of kind of like anti Semitic rhetoric and very Christian nationalist rhetoric, and gained a pretty decent following doing that. He's just not the type of individual that people should want to hear to, but people are, there's going to be these weird niche individuals that see his content like, he's appealing to me because I hate society. So that's kind of the negatives of it at the end of the day. With that said, how much do you think individual content creators will continue to have in terms of impact in how we uh, deal with, or how the political divide or political discourse grows moving forward in society?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to have a bigger impact across all kinds of spaces, and certainly in the political realm is going to be one, and I think that comes back to also, that idea that folks aren't going out and consuming sort of traditional ways of, and something else, what I was thinking about when you were talking about that too, is how a lot of the younger generation is simply tuned out because it seems so toxic, right? So they're actively trying to stay away from political stuff, and a lot of times they're getting, a political message kind of squeezed into other stuff, so they're watching other content, and then that influencer, like you say, might also throw in some political stuff. Might be well informed, it might be not so well informed, right? I mean, these influencers, like you say, you can't really vet them, and we don't know where they're coming from, and some we don't even know for sure how they're kind of backed and how they got that big. Was it really organic, or did they have a lot of money behind them? And then how much is their messaging controlled? Is it really? And so, I worry about this a lot. I mean, I don't really have any idea how it's going to flush out, but I do know that it's going to have huge impact, and I think most of the traditional sort of people that look at this in social science, in in the sciences in general, and I think in out in the world of sort of political wonkism. I mean, I think they're going to be way behind on this, and they're just not going to appreciate how much is happening in that space. And I'm very concerned about platforms like TikTok, where we don't know an influence of something like of China, right? So I mean, they could have a lot of control over what kind of content they're feeding Americans versus other countries. So they could squeeze in a lot of really pro-China material. Suddenly, everybody thinks, the China way of doing information is better, and things like that. I mean, that's just one example, but so I'm a huge advocate for more transparency of these platforms, and specifically like opening them up to like independent bodies for study of their algorithms, and and also the data, right? So being able to let academia or researchers, even in the private sector, get controlled access to that data, so there's some data transparency, because all those platforms now have shut down that kind of data. Elon Musk shut Twitter, used to have a lot of it, and they shut it down. Facebook, Meta had CrowdTangle, they shut that down. TikTok never had any way for researchers or any outside party to see what they're really doing behind the curtain. So for me, that's, it seems like that's something would be easier to get behind, um, than sort of regulation about controlling the content and that kind of thing, which is what a lot of people want to talk about. I want to talk about transparency, because that seems like that would be more bipartisan. Like, you're not impinging on their free speech per se, but we do want to understand how these algorithms are impacting our brains.
Yeah, I definitely think in terms of the algorithms, it's very interesting um, in terms of their impact. And I will say that when it comes down to social media and what TikTok is doing and what Facebook, Instagram, and stuff is doing, I definitely think that a lot of these platforms definitely are not vetted out the best. I mean, read out a kind of current news of the fact that there is attorney general suing Meta in the first place, right? And then we already got the whole stuff regarding TikTok and the TikTok CEO coming to America, and they're trying to figure out whether or not we want to ban TikTok in America. So, like I've already said before, the conversation in terms of social media is becoming much more interesting. And then we got Twitter/X here. And honestly, whatever you think about Elon Musk, the way Elon Musk is handling, some of this stuff is something that I really do think is a good idea. In terms of community notes, I think was the best idea that he implemented. Having the ability to, if a viral tweet out there, we have someone who has the ability to provide the proper context or debunk a wrong thing that is posted and say, hey man, this is not the right information. Hey man, there's bigger information going on here. Don't just believe in this. And the community notes is right next to the viral tweet. So stuff like that is very important where if you're going to have someone create a viral moment, whether it's clickbait or because people get very upset at the most, you know, minor things for the most part, you should definitely give the individuals the ability to make sure that people understand the proper context. And I think community notes is a great way to do this. The way of communication on X/Twitter is definitely interesting in terms of hopping in a space and in a group conversation, or now that you're allowed to video or voice call someone if you want to have a direct conversation. So the communication aspect is definitely changing, and even the contextual information that is being pushed in front of people are changing as well. These are all good things, of course. I think in terms of how people approach Twitter being the public square that Elon Musk said it was going to be. But with that said, the conversation of algorithms is so interesting because is it a good thing that people are allowed to kind of push into their wants so exclusively, right? In terms of the algorithm on TikTok, if you watch one video of this, Democrat lady talking about some opinion about abortion, what's going to happen moving forward? You're going to get more videos about Democrat stuff regarding abortion. Is that something? And eventually, the average citizen is going to start believing the stuff that they keep on saying on their platform. They see something the first time, you're like, oh, that sounds pretty good. They don't have the perspective to understand the other side of the argument, but it sounded good. You can make logical arguments on any side. It's not that hard. I can make a logical argument on the Democrat side. I can make a logical argument on the Republican side, especially, like you said earlier, if you abide to their morals. The moment you go abide to their morals, it's easy to capture them. So someone sees a video, sees a tweet or whatever, said about a certain ideology for abortion or whatever. It sounds good. They're like, oh, I'm gonna believe this. They're just gonna get more content to reinforce that thinking until they are fully bought in. So that is exactly why I'm thinking of the algorithm and how it kind of pushes content people want to see. And when it comes to these political situations, it's much harder to dictate if this is a good thing or not because they don't have the proper perspective and they can get pushed to a side of thinking. Potentially, then that's when the responsibility of content creators start playing a part, is making sure you're providing that proper nuance. I will shout out, my podcast. I'll shout out Destiny, a YouTuber I've seen on YouTube who always tries to provide the perspective. He's a Democrat. He has a Democratic perspective, but he tries to bring in opinions from the Republican side to see if they're making good points, to see if they had rationale that they want to abide by as well. And maybe people can open up their perspective from hearing that as well. So my question to you here, David, is we understand the algorithm can do these potential harmful things exclusively when it comes down to, political rhetoric, which is much more important at the end of the day and much more complicated than having one straight opinion about something. How much responsibility do these individual content creators should have in these kind of content that they're making for the people and the nuance that they are or not making for the people as well?
Yeah, yeah, I definitely want to answer that. I do want to jump back real quick though. It's in talking about that lawsuit, right? That lawsuit that they're doing, that couldn't happen if we didn't have some transparency into that data, right? So that lawsuit couldn't happen 5 years from now because there won't be data about what the algorithms are doing. So, even talking about like what we algorithms are doing, we're guessing at this point because or we're basing on past data that we got some view into what the algorithms are doing. Yeah. So what your question is, what is the responsibility of the content creators? Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's obviously, we're both kind of in a space trying to deliver quality information, right? Quality, um, in my case, bipartisan. I think in your case as well, where we're just trying to provide the information. We're trying to make sure we've got quality sources and we've vetted this information. It's good information. That's my mission, and I think that's your mission as well. Um, so obviously that's a good thing. We should all do that, I would hope. But obviously, for some people they want to get clicks and likes, and they're going to do what they have to do to get clicks and likes. So, that's free speech right there, right? I mean, they have free speech. They aren't guaranteed to have it be distributed. I mean, there's no, Meta and Twitter and everybody else are private companies. They're not government agencies. So it's not a First Amendment issue if they decide to stop posting what you say, right? Maybe that's not within their policy, right? They don't have to accept your stuff. That's not a First Amendment issue. They're private companies and they can have whatever policy they want. Now you can elect to opt out because you don't like that policy. That's how business works. I can say, well, I don't like that platform then and go to a different platform, which a lot of people have done, right? I mean, people got off Twitter and went to, I don't know, some of the various more marginal ones because they didn't like some of the Twitter policies on blocking what they called misinformation. So I do want to straighten that out. But for that content creator, it's kind of up to them, right? It's up to their mission and what are they trying to do if they want to grow their podcast. I mean, I feel like I know in my case, I've probably ruined some other podcasts because I got them to tone it down, right? And now they don't get all the buzz, they don't get all the clicks, they don't get all the likes, because it's easier to just go out there and rage, right? Go out there and rage, and people will. There's a bunch of people that want that, and they'll think you're great because you're raging about the other side all the time. So I don't, I can't put the responsibility on the participants because that's kind of what people do. I mean, yeah, but I would love it if nobody rage bait all the time and if nobody, was dishing out misinformation all the time. But that's just not how the world works. I don't have that
I think
power.
your audio. All right, talk again.
I think we were talking about, how much responsibility the content creators should have, and obviously, I mean, if you're intentionally dishing out bad information, then yeah, you have to be responsible for that. But how do you hold them responsible, right? I mean, we do have a very strong sort of free speech culture in this country, so people can sort of say whatever they want, even if it's a lie, as long as they're not, libeling anybody, and even that can be kind of hard to prove in court. So people can kind of say what they want. So this is a a challenge that we have. It's a right that we like. It's a at least, even if it's not a legal right in some of these cases, it's a it's a cultural thing that we really respect the idea of free speech, and people can kind of say what they want. So yeah, do I think they should be responsible some way? Yeah, but I can't. We don't really have laws or rules that can really hold them responsible. Now these platforms can have whatever rules they want. They're private companies. They're not under the they're not they're not bound by the First Amendment. They can do whatever they want in their policies, within whatever other laws there are. But so people could be constrained on certain platforms, and they have been. And this is why they've moved to some people have moved to alternative platforms because what they were saying was deemed too much misinformation, and they were booted off maybe platform A, and they went to sort of a more extreme or more alternative platform. So that already has happened. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I would love it if the creators took responsibility. But I mean, they're gonna take advantage of what they can to get likes and clicks, and and build their audience. And if they think that involves misinformation or even just a lot of rage bait and that kind of stuff, they're probably gonna do it. And I can't really stop them if that's the choices that they've made.
I definitely hear what you're saying. Because yes, there is a certain extent a need, or I guess a want to obviously, succeed in whatever you're doing in terms of the content creator space. And a lot of times when it comes to, succeeding, especially succeeding quickly, it's surrounded by some kind of drama, some type of clickbait, some type of crazy take that doesn't make any sense. You get a lot of views, get a lot of attention, get a lot of agreement or outrage, and that's how people kind of go about it. Or you do the slow and steady grind at the end of the day. So I definitely hear you there. At the same time, I would say that individuals also have a, especially the ones who growing a large amount of influence and impact, do have a certain level of responsibility with the influence that they are garnering. The monetary gain that they're getting is from the same people that is listening and viewing them, so they have a responsibility to those individuals to not kind of steer them in the wrong direction, which kind of, that is the game at the end of the day. It's I've had this conversation before in terms of this new space of basically role models, in terms of this new generation with the content creators, and how they differ so much from prior generations of role models from what I've seen. Because we've seen, obviously there's going to be people doing dumb things, of course, in terms of musicians and actors and athletes, etc., etc. But the way they carry themselves for the most part obviously plays into the image, the impact of the PR team, and making sure that they are kind of resembling a very specific kind of image for these individuals. It's much more deliberate, it's much more careful. It's a realization to an extent that who I am is due to the people, whereas the content creators don't have that kind of responsibility off the outset. They get popular and they kind of do whatever they want, and it's either they learn how popular they are, because they're the private institutions kind of do have standards. As long as you don't go past that standards, you're okay. But those standards don't depict morality. They just depict kind of obscene versus non-obscene stuff, right? They don't kind of care what you say or do, as long as you kind of don't go outside the law, basically. And there's too much gray area that can be very damaging even within the boundaries of the law, as we know. So I will say that they do have a responsibility, but obviously everybody's their own individual person at the end of the day. Um, with that said, in terms of kind of like outside social media, and when you're kind of interacting with the people out in the world, in terms of discussing politics, or trying to mend this political divide between people, that's right in front of you, how do you think it's best to handle these conversations or discussions? Obviously very much different from social media and the internet. In person is much more personable, and probably a lot more efficient in engaging in a proper conversation.
Yeah, I mean, social media is just the worst place to try to have these kind of conversations because nuance just gets sort of blown out of the water. The loud voices kind of creep in pretty fast and just kind of overwhelm the conversation with a lot of shouting. So while that does happen in real life too, and can happen in real life, I mean, so my advice on that, or where I go with that is, start off with sort of an intellectual humility. Start off and especially if it's someone that you expect to differ on pretty strongly, try to go in with a very much a listen, approach first. So an active listening mode first, and really listen genuinely. Like, go in with the idea that you have something to learn, not with you have something to prove. Because both sides do have something to learn from each other, no matter how far apart you are. And so if you go in with that attitude, and maybe the first interaction, you literally don't even try to present your view, other than maybe if you feel like you have to, like, well, I disagree with you on that, but please go on, or I want to hear more, in the first round, and then maybe take all that away that you just got, because it might be pretty shocking, because sometimes when you open up like that and you don't, attack the person and try to fight on every word and the thing gets hostile right away, the person will open up a lot more and tell you things that maybe you didn't know or they wouldn't have said otherwise, because suddenly you're that strange dude that doesn't attack them all the time. And so you are genuinely listening and wanting to learn. And so do that and take that away, and then say, hey, you know that thing we talked about last time? Can we talk about that again? And I want to understand more about this. And then maybe say, oh, let me tell you, are you okay if I tell you how I feel about that? Can I tell you what my position on that is? And then start that maybe a little bit at a time. But and so don't sort of, the worst thing you can do is what everybody kind of wants to do is, I want to know that what are the 5 things I can do so that in a couple of sentences they'll say the right thing, or they'll understand my position, or they'll change around to my position. And the other last thing you want to do is, you don't want to go load up on facts. Like, you don't want to go to the internet and just get a million facts. It doesn't hurt to have, some facts there, but that's not going to change anybody's mind. You first have to understand where they are coming from and how they got there. And this whole idea, if you even want to change anybody's mind, this whole idea of changing someone's mind, no one changes anyone else's mind. That's not how it works. You change your own mind. So all you can do, if you're want to have that dialogue where maybe you can move the needle, maybe not even completely move them to your side or anything, maybe move the needle in some way or make them open to where you're coming from, is create that space to let them understand where they are and take themselves down that path to maybe say, oh, maybe there is another way to look at this. You can't make them do that or take them there. You can only create that space for them to take themselves there. And so I think when you go in with that attitude and really try to avoid, just absolutely avoid the idea of, I'm just going to go look up some more facts and hurl them some more facts, and that's going to fix everything if I just tell them more things. So that's my main advice. Start off by mostly listening, maybe completely only listen, and then say, maybe in round two, hey, that one thing we talked about, are you okay? How would would you be open to hearing my perspective on that? And then maybe that's round two, and really go in every time thinking, there's something for me to learn here. I don't know it all. I may think I know it all, and they're completely wrong. But no matter how insane they sound, they got there the same way you did. They have the same kind of brain. They have the same kind of, the rational process works the same way. They took the facts that they have, they worked through and came to a different conclusion. It's not that they're idiots. It's not that they're racist. It's not that they're dumb. It's not, they're not that they're evil. They don't have bad intentions. They just came to a different conclusion than you. So you have something to learn from them too. So that's my approach for, that's what I recommend. Now, all of this is easier said than done, but that's kind of where I come from on it.
Fair enough, and I've talked about it on this podcast on terms of these conversations that you're having with people. And while you're doing that, always consider or always realize that the individual that you're talking to, unless they're a sociopath, unless they're a psychopath, more than likely they have the best in intentions in terms of society. And especially if it's like a friend or maybe even a work acquaintance, more than likely these individuals don't have the best in interest for the community you're in. Like, maybe unless you're in this weird circumstance where this guy hates your guts to the point where he just wants you to, kick dust. But if you're engaging in a legit conversation with someone, that person wants to engage just like you want to engage. So having the flip in terms of your perception of the individual is always a good way to start the conversation, so you can engage in a conversation with meaning versus with the intention of winning the debate. So I think that's also very important when you dive into these conversations, of course. Final thing I want to ask you is that, what, in your opinion, what do you think is the best thing, or what is something you recommend the most for individuals who are getting into politics and who want to kind of dive into the nuances of politics? What do you recommend for these individuals to kind of do first? How do you think they should engage into the political landscape and try to kind of be part of the positive change that we're discussing?
Hmm. Interesting question. Yeah. Well, first of all, for anybody that is doing that, yay for you, because we need more, sort of regular folks getting involved and being actively, actively as citizens. So yeah. So I mean, I guess that would be, there's a long list there, I guess, but I mean, I would say, it would be good to probably start with some government. make sure because I feel like like you mentioned before, I'm not sure the current public schools or even private schools really teach a lot about just the basics of government and how that works. So I would maybe start there, and then it wouldn't hurt to I would say one of the be thinking about there's a there's one tool for this, and there's a couple of others, but one tool for this is there's a thing called the Dignity Index. And you can look that up. Dignity Index, just Google that, or dignityindex.us, I think is their website, where you can sort of look at, like, when I'm doing speech, am I demonstrating contempt, or am I allowing dignity to my adversary or in my speech? So I think that's so that's sort of a piece of the civic dialogue piece of it. But yeah, I think a good place to start would sort of go look a little bit about how government works, just even in the basics. Like what is a democratic republic? You talked before about things like some of the everybody thinks they know what the founding fathers wanted or whatever, but I mean, maybe read George Washington's final address. I think that's very, very informative. But there's other stuff too. But also, and some of the things there are appreciating that good dialogue. I mean, you talked before about it, when things are working in a democratic republic like ours. Probably almost never is everybody happy. I think you were sort of using words like utopia and stuff. It's like there's always somebody that's not happy, because when it's working right, not everybody's getting what they want. And so a lot of it is that, kind of being good at having serious differences, but still being able to talk through those serious differences. And you don't always come to the right compromise or any compromise, but at least you're better at at realizing that you have to have those diverse views. If you go and only have the one view, you're not going to probably solve all the problems. I mean, you need those diverse views. You may think the other people or other side are all dummies, but you're going to want that diverse view. Sometimes it is going to play, no matter which side you're on. Once in a while, the other side is doing something that actually makes the solution better. So I would say that that's a good place to start. Get a little bit educated about all those things. I think, but congrats to anybody that wants to jump in. I think that's great.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I will just say that obviously get very much involved in your local elections. I always say consistently that local and state elections are, to you as an individual, more important than the federal election, whether you believe it or not. It is the truth. So definitely get involved with that. It's important in terms of changing, at the very least, your community and where you live, of course. So that is all we got for today. Do you have any final words that you want to say?
Well, yeah, I couldn't agree more about the local politics and just local news as well. I mean, there's been a dearth of, local news has basically just died now, and everything's national. So that's why we get all agitated about these national politics, because that's kind of what the kind of news we have. It's all national. They want to get us excited about these national issues. And yes, absolutely, pay attention to those local issues. Get involved locally, and also same thing in sort of your fighting division, right? Go sit in on a town council meeting, go to the fire department. I mean, this is where you're going to meet the people in your neighborhood that might differ from you. So yes, local community is a great place for all of us to start.
All right, excellent. Well, like I said, that is all we got today. Appreciate having you on, David, of course. All his information will be on my website. You can check out and in the description as well for you to check out his information, check out his podcast as well, which is, very interesting conversations going on over there with the Outrage Overload. And I will say this that, even though like your approach is definitely a lot more methodical in terms of the process. These conversations, whether it's on my podcast or his podcast, are always going to be valuable in terms of, at the very least, growing the nuance that we keep on reiterating to people, because it is important, whether you agree or not. It is very important. Stuck in these kind of echo chambers and stuck in these kind of strict ways of thinking, at the end of the day, regardless of what side you're on, your side, the other side, just this one way of thinking is never going to be the productive way in establishing a better society. We need that little push pull from both sides. That's how you create better solutions. You don't create solutions from everybody agreeing, you create solutions from people disagreeing. So hope you guys enjoyed this podcast, of course. Rate it 5 stars if you did. You visit the website www.purplepoliticalbreakdown.com to see all the information, or to email me, of course, about anything regarding something that you thought was interesting, or if you want to be a future guest on the show, feel free to do all that, of course. So I do hope you guys enjoy. Y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.